impressions of Main Street as perhaps someone who'd been away and come back again?
Oh, okay. First impressions would be a lot of change. The stores are not what they used to be. I remember there's a lot of retail stores and people walking up and down the sidewalk, and now there's a lot of those are gone, and the ones that have replaced them are just like offices or maybe someone with a second-hand shop. I mean, that was something I don't ever remember seeing when I was growing up here. Second-hand shops, but there seem to be a few of those. A lot of new things. Some of the businesses are prosperous, like the banks have put up new facades, the awnings around the buildings. A lot of changes. Some are actually looking much better than they did when I was here 20 years ago, and others have run downhill a little bit.
Can you tell me about Main Street before you were 12 years old? What kinds of activities did you do there? When did you go? That kind of thing.
Oh, okay. There were 2 times that we went. One was, well, depending on what we called town night was. Okay, living where I do, we had 3 towns. We had Palmer, Pomeroy, and Pocahontas. And one time Palmer was Wednesday night, Pocahontas was Friday night, and Pomeroy was Saturday night. And so you went to town 3 nights a week. And we also went on rainy days, because farmers couldn't farm, so you went uptown. The activity was, one, Mom would go buy groceries, and Dad would go to the pool hall. And I would go with Dad to the pool hall. And that was the primary activities before I was 12. Later on during that period when I could run around on my own, then my activities were to go to the dime store, hobby shop, maybe 1 or 2 other places, but those were the primary places. Same place it is now. And was it Gilbert Grosvenor that owned it? Mr. Grosvenor, anyway. He had a babysitting service for all the women shopping uptown. Over in the corner, as you come in the door now, it would be to your right, there were about 1 million comic books, all in a mess, and kids just all over the place reading the comic books. And right by the window was a Pepsi machine that cost a dime. And 2 rows over was the candy counter with another 1 million choices of penny candy. The big selection, or the big choice, was peanuts to put in your Pepsi. And kids would sit there all evening long, drinking Pepsi, eating peanuts, and reading comic books. I didn't have a lot of town friends. I mean, you'd have kids from your class in school, whatever, but since you live out here in the country, you don't have these people that you go play Little League with or all these other things. So, no, it was just I would be there on my own and possibly run into someone I knew and possibly not. Either way, I was happy.
What about your sisters? Where did they fit into the whole scheme of things?
They went to the grocery store with Mom, because that was her job when she went to town. Okay. When we went to the pool hall, and it wasn't a bar. They didn't have bars back then. It was a pool hall. And they didn't have bars because there was no liquor by the drink, so it was a totally different thing than they have nowadays. We had 2 of them that we normally went to, Art Cogley's, which I kind of remember, but the one I remember most was Drobny's. And when you'd walk in the door, first thing that would hit you was dark and cigar smoke. And it was kind of a warm feeling, actually. People to the left would be playing cards, almost always. To the right was the bar. Dad and I would walk in, and you'd head to the bar first. And when I was really young, he'd lift me up on top of the bar. And as I got older, I'd get my own bar stool. But he would order an old style, and I would get a root beer and a Tootsie Roll. And DeLoss Drobny he was the owner and the bartender, and he would bring it to you. And I don't remember any specific comments. He probably even knew what we wanted before we came in there. You didn't even have to ask him for it. And then the next thing we'd do was just sit and kind of reconnoiter the place to see who was there that we knew. And a lot of times you'd find people, well, if we were there in the afternoon, for example, on a rainy day, you'd see all kinds of farmers that you knew. And these were people Dad's age, and they were not necessarily great friends of his, but friends. The kind of friend where you say hello on the street and whatever. Specifically, I remember Ray Garrels. He played a lot of cards. He had a really fun laugh. I remember him being a happy person. Milton Olson was another one I remember quite a bit. And his son lives 2 places north here. He was far enough away that we didn't see him very often. But yet he was a relative and a kind of a friend that way too, so it was fun to see him. Ralph Hunter, there was another one. I'm not even sure if he's alive anymore, but Ralph Hunter was another one that would show up there quite frequently. Again, these were all farmers, all in town on a rainy day. Some of these people, there's a guy named Smoke Vasika, I think. I just knew this guy as Smoke, and a good storyteller. And a friend of Dad's there too. Don Honesy was another one that you'd see there fairly frequently. And he farmed, Dad farmed another place a couple miles north of here, and Don farmed right next to him. So he was, in that respect, a neighbor, but he lived in town. A lot of faces I probably don't, you know, if I thought a while I could maybe think of their names, but the names don't really come to me now. Other things we'd see in there. I don't actually remember a pool table, to tell you the truth. But it was a pool hall, so I'm sure there was a pool table in there. Conversation, I remember. It was typical farmer conversation. And just this weekend I was in Palmer, and I heard the same things there that I used to hear 30 years ago up at the pool hall. And it was the conversation, well, right now it's about harvest. They have a new term nowadays. You can tell what it is right away, but it's, how's the beaning going? And I don't remember the term. It was just called combining back then. But, well, pretty good, pretty good. Farmers, I don't know how to describe their manner of speaking, but it's, you can always start a conversation with, how's the combining going, how's the beaning going, whatever. And the reply is, well, nothing is ever great around here. It's always, well, pretty good. Because if they're getting 50 bushel the acre beans, it's not going to be worth anything when they sell it, so they're not really concerned about it. But they disclose a little bit about the yield, and I think sometimes that changed a little bit with how many beers they'd had too. Or that was always my impression, I'm not sure. But other things were, especially today I hear breakdowns. I think farmers spend more time repairing machinery than they do actually using it. And I think back then it was somewhat that way, but not at all like it is today. Just the normal mundane details of farming was what they discussed. And of course, being a small kid, it was really fascinating because this is what my dad did, so I got to learn a little more about what my dad did. Even though I might be out in the field, it was just nice to have his perspective on how the whole thing worked too.
Were there other kids there with you?
Not that I remember. Occasionally a younger person would be in there, but not necessarily someone that I knew. And now that was different in Palmer. When I'd go there, I knew everybody, all the kids. But in Pocahontas, it must not have been the thing to do, to take your kid into the pool hall or something.
Would you say, how long would you say you spent in the pool hall?
2 beers.
And that would last you how long?
Don't know. I'm sure it was less than an hour, because we always had a traditional thing when you go to town. I mean, Dad would always ask, but you knew the answer. Well, how long do you need? And then someone would look at the clock in the bank or something like that. And if it was about 5 minutes after, a quarter after, you would just put it up to the next hour. So we spent less than an hour there usually. You must have grown up the same way.
Okay, let's talk about Main Street after you were 12 years old, but before you were 16, before you had a driver's license.
Okay.
Okay, so in the preteen time, did it change for you then, being a little bit older?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It wasn't nearly as interesting, for one thing. In fact, I suppose like when I was maybe 12 or 13, I would still go uptown with the folks. And you'd kind of go the rounds. You'd do the dime store. You wouldn't sit and read comic books anymore or buy penny candy, but you'd do the dime store. You'd do what was called just looking, emulating your parents when they'd go through the stores and, can I help you? No, just looking. So you go just looking in the dime store, and again the hobby store. That was always kind of interesting. Hardware stores were fascinating. Another place that, now thinking back at that time, that was really fascinating to me was the Western Auto Store, because I was old enough then and mechanically inclined enough then that I had bicycles to overhaul. And they had the neatest parts in the Western Auto Store. And you could go through there and finger the parts, feel through them, and think about what you might need for your bicycle or how to put something like this together. So that held a little fascination to me, but for the most part, it wasn't that great of a deal. In fact, when I was in my later teens, I didn't even go uptown with the folks. I'd just stay home because it was something they did to go uptown, a necessity, whatever, but didn't hold that much attraction for me anymore.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about after you got your driver's license. What was Main Street to you then? It probably wasn't the retail establishment.
Oh, no.
It became something else. What was it?
Yeah, it was just a place to drive your car and see other people.
Tell about that. Describe that in as close a detail as you possibly can from the time you drive into town to when you know.
Well, you do the same thing. You drive up the highway to the four-way corner, take a right, and take a left on Main Street. You'd head north. Now, there wasn't the stop sign there as I remember.
What are you driving?
67 Ford. Pretty much a brand new car that the folks had. But at the time, that was the only thing I had available when I first got my driver's license. So, you got the folks' practically new car. You got to be a little careful. But I didn't hot rod around with it, that's for sure. But you drive it uptown. You go up, stop at the stoplight if it were red, or green if it were go if it were green. Go up to the courthouse and make a Louis. And everybody knows what a Louis is. It's just to make a U-turn up by the courthouse. You'd head back down, and again at the stoplight, and then you'd go down almost to the south end of Main Street. The next stop was always the bowling alley. And to get to the bowling alley, you had to go that diagonal that's no longer there, but it was by the gas stations. So you take a left on the diagonal, stop, look, and head out to the bowling alley.
What were you looking for?
Don't know. The meaning of life? No. What you were looking for is to be seen uptown, I suppose. I think that was the reason people did this. I don't remember really looking for anything, but that's, I'm sure, why kids did this, was just so that you were seen uptown driving a car.
Did you habitually take anyone with you, or?
No. You might run into some friends, but no, I mean, I went up alone. That was always the case. I drove up alone. And that may be a reason that you were looking up there, was to find some friends that you might ride around with, or they would be with you too.
Where did you buying the gas for the car as a teen?
When I was a kid, it was an allowance, big-time allowance, 15 pennies a week. I remember one time I accumulated over 100 pennies. That's when I first learned what a dollar was. And I was quite small when I was getting this too. Later on, the allowances grew to, I think a quarter was the max on the allowance. As I got older, we raised chickens here. Had 500 chickens we'd raise in the spring, and then in the fall you'd move them into the chicken house, and they were the layers. We sold the eggs down to Ohio Bus in Palmer, but there were neighbors that would come over to buy eggs. So that's where my money came from. I took care of the chickens pretty much. Mom would pick the eggs at noon, but in the evenings I would do all the chicken feeding, watering, whatever, and gathering the eggs, and also putting the eggs in the cartons, etc. And my pay or whatever for this, or my allowance, was whatever we sold to the neighbors, I got to keep. And it was actually, for the time, it was quite sizable. I'd probably average about $40 a month, which was a pretty good allowance for a kid back in those days.
What about yourself?
Oh yeah, that just brought to mind, when you talk parade, Memorial Day parades. We'd start at the school, go down to Main Street, take a right, head out the highway, go to the dredge ditch, drop the wreath in, and then go to the cemeteries. So that was part of the Memorial Day parade, plus the homecoming parades. That started the school, went to the corner and turned the other way. Went uptown, did a Louis, as I remember, didn't it? But then we came back and had the pep rally there at the four-way stoplight. So it served the parade, or it was for the parades, and again a gathering place for all the people to watch the parades too. Another thing I thought about in the gathering in the evenings, Flynn's parking lot. That was a real popular place because you could drive up and down and be seen, but if you wanted to stop and I don't know what was there. I think people would just tend to gather there, but Flynn's parking lot was a place, at least for quite a while, that you just pull your car in there and stand on the street or sitting on someone's car or whatever, watch who was going by, and they would notice you. Then, you know, if it was a friend or whatever, they'd stop in and join you there at Flynn's parking lot. Feeling good about...
An encounter, for example, on Main Street as a teen. Maybe you met a girl somewhere, or maybe you guys just got together.
Actually, I can think of a few times feeling bad.
Okay.
You want to hear one of those stories?
Sure,
yeah. One of them in particular was, we used to go out and sit up what we called the grass. There was some indoor-outdoor fake grass, I guess, up on, be basically like Hemker's hardware store somewhere in that area. And there was a few of us that would sit around there. And I won't mention his name, but I was actually assaulted there one time on Main Street of Pocahontas. And
By another teen?
a little older than I, by probably 3 or 4 years. Some guys out drinking and, you know, just harassing us is what it was. And you say something maybe you shouldn't have, but I wasn't that type at all. But he actually came up, he didn't hit me in the face, but like this, knocked me off my feet. So that was a little bit of a scary experience. Another bad experience was driving up and down Main Street. At the south end it said no U-turn, so instead of making a U-turn, you made your own rules about what a U-turn was. You drove on that little triangular spot there and turned around there, came up on the diagonal and back up to Main Street. And this was Martin Paduska and I were riding around at the time. And back in the 70s, we all had as long a hair as we could get. And we were stopped by one of the policemen for doing this thing that everybody else always did, but it was actually illegal. And his first comment was, "Oh, I thought I caught a couple of girls here." So a little police harassment there on Main Street was one of the things too. Good memories. There's nothing that really stands out. It was just a nice place to be and you'd see a lot of friends. But thought of another bad memory. I could tell you about a fight I watched there one time. This, I won't mention the names either, but it was the big kids beating up on the wimpy little kids is what it was. It was in Flynn's parking lot. A carload of big kids feeling tough, and they were tough. They could beat up anybody they wanted to. And we stopped there, and I don't know what had been going on between these two groups before. We weren't a part of that, but both cars stopped there. one guy got, the smaller guy, he was actually from Palmer, he got out of the car, and the big guys just came over and wailed on him. They had him down on the ground, wailing on him. And John Peters was a good friend of mine, too. He stopped it. He broke the fight up. Well, Pete could whip anybody there, too. He wasn't the type, but he could have if he wanted to, and he just stopped the fight, so, okay. Someone I was in awe of was Leo Pattee. He was a downtown businessman, always well-dressed, had a nice store, and a different type of person than we were out here on the farm. So he was impressive to me. Someone I might have held in awe. See, the mayor had no control over me, so I couldn't have even told you who the mayor was back then. Or city council people, anything like that. Teachers you held in awe, but that was only if you saw them on Main Street. They weren't a part of the businesses up there. Gilbert Grosvenor, I held him in awe a little bit because he controlled the comic books. And he was really a nice man, but there was a time when it came to sweeping up at night and whatever. I remember the big wide brooms with the compound they'd push in front of him. And if you didn't take the hint, he would sharply remind you it was time to go home. So a little bit of awe there.
Did she go and why?
She went to Flynn's mostly, or it was James's when we were younger. And I think the reason she went there mostly because Dorothy Blumberg always said hi. She still always says hi. She must have been working at that store about 100 years, and she's barely over 50 the way she looks, but she knows me. I've been gone 20 years. I go into that store, hi Leonard, how you doing? And that was probably one of the main things was that Dorothy Blumberg was a really friendly clerk, always knew you, always knew the kids, had conversation about this, that, or whatever. So I'm sure that was Mom's favorite place to go. And back then, Woods was just a small store on Main Street. And actually, I don't even remember going inside that store. I know she went in there, because you had to be real careful about shopping. A penny here, a penny there made a difference, so you wouldn't just go to one store, because the other store might have some bargains that you needed to pick up too. But Flynn's would have been the primary one, the favorite one.
Of your favorite cartoon characters, and were yours different from your sister's?
I don't remember my sister sitting there reading the comic books. This was kind of a boy thing. But characters, actually, mostly I remember the Disney characters. Donald Duck, the Mickey Mouse, whatever. Actually, I found, there were serial comics, the Batmans and the whatever, and I don't know why, but I didn't find a whole lot of interest in those. Probably because you had to follow the story and this and that, and we were up there quite frequently, but it just, I was looking for some light entertainment, I guess, so the Donald Ducks were the ones that fit my style.
Did you end up buying any of them?
No.
Never bought them?
Well, maybe, I wouldn't say never, but I bet I'd never bought over 5 comic books in my whole life. In fact, I remember when I was a kid, sent a postcard into Uncle Dick on Fort Dodge TV and got 5 comic books. That was quite a pile of comic books, so I bet I never bought more than that in my life.
Did you have friends who did buy comics?
No. Of course, I don't know. See, living in the country, you don't get to go see friends at their house. And country kids didn't buy comic books, not that I know of. I had one set of cousins who had a whole pile of them. That was kind of impressive, but that was the only country kids I knew with a lot of comic books.
What can you tell me about the movie theater?
Very little.
You didn't go?
Didn't go. I went to Old Yeller. As a family, we went to Old Yeller. That's the only movie I can recall going to, except Christmas. When Santa Claus came to town, now there was some fun. We would go, I don't know, everybody went uptown because Santa Claus was there. There was the big shopping times. And they farmed the kids out to the theater. I didn't realize at the time, but that's what was going on. They farmed the kids out to the theater so you could go buy the Santa Claus presents. So there was about 1 million kids up at the theater, and they would just pack us in there, sitting on people's laps, the whole works. I can remember sitting with the neighbors over here, Christophers and Schoens and whatever. And it was great because it was all cartoons. It seemed like all afternoon. I don't know how long they were in there, but it was probably an hour or so was all it was, but it did seem like it was all afternoon. It was just wonderful. Then when you came out, you got a sack of candy, popcorn, or candy and peanuts and an apple or something like that from the businessman uptown is where it came from, I guess. Santa Claus, they told us, but I think we knew better by then too. But yeah, that was fun. I enjoyed the theater for that part. But no, the movies were not a big thing with me when I was a kid.
What about the drive-in then?
Oh yeah.
What can you tell everything, describe the whole thing?
That was a real popular meeting place when we were in high school. In the back few rows were high school kids from here and from all other towns too. It was a real popular place. You could bring in a 6-pack of beer and just sit back there. And I don't remember a whole lot of drinking, but it was available. There was no problem finding it there and whatever. And nobody watched the movies. It was just like in the city you'd call it a cocktail party now because people roam around talking to each other, and that's exactly what that was. there'd be some people would congregate at somebody's pickup. Those were kind of fun because you'd drive them in backwards and you have a place to sit and whatever. But it was just a place to run into your friends, to talk about things, to enjoy life is what we were doing. Movies I couldn't tell you a thing about.
They had a popcorn stand there
Mm-hmm.
at the drive-in.
And
Did you ever buy the popcorn? Or did you bring your own?
no, well, when I was a kid, I remember a couple times going to drive-in. We, of course, brought our own popcorn then. You wouldn't spend money on popcorn. But no, we bought popcorn, hot dogs. That was a part of the experience, too, was buying the food there. I got a story I won't tell on tape.
Characters are sort of humorous?
Gilbert Hunt was a warm person. Used to get my hair cut there. And that was an interesting place, too, because that was, you know, one of these private domain things where you got to learn about older men and their ways of life and the things they talked about and whatever. And back in those days, you didn't make an appointment for a haircut. You just walked in and waited your turn. And if there were over maybe 3 people sitting there, you went down the street, did something else, and came back later. So you got to hear a lot of good conversation. And a good barber, they're the best philosophers in the world because they know everybody, they've heard every opinion, and they know not to inject their own opinion in it too much, but to kind of keep the conversation going. So that was really interesting. And Gilbert then, when you were done getting your hair cut, he had this really neat way of flipping the cloth off of you and at the same time sneaking a stick of gum in your hand. It was just like that, like a magician is how he would do it. So that was always a fun memory of Gilbert Hunt in Main Street. Oh, okay, taboos, yeah, there were. Well, the stories earlier about the pool hall, the grocery store, that definitely comes to mind as a taboo because women did not go into the pool hall, period. And neither did little girls, of course, then. Men really didn't go into the grocery store either. It wasn't because they were forbidden. I think it was their own kind saying, he went to the grocery store. Not a real man. So the men never went in the grocery store. In fact, I don't remember I know he did in maybe later years, but as a child, my father never went into the grocery stores. So
When do you think that changed?
When? Probably in the late 60s, maybe. I don't know for sure, but I kind of, well, see, another thing, my first recollection of my father going into a grocery store is to buy milk, which we didn't do living on the farm. You had your own milk here, so you didn't buy town milk. Stuff tasted terrible, for one thing. It tasted like the wax they put it in. But I can remember coming back from vacation one time and had to pick up a few things, whatever, and Dad went into the store and bought milk. So and this was like in the 60s sometime, or late 60s when we quit milking by then. But not as a regular thing until they were quite older, actually.
Any other taboos?
Yeah, you probably, trying to think, some of the stores you maybe you didn't go in because they weren't the browsing stores. I'm trying to think specifically of what that would be, but, well, I didn't go into Thelma's Apparel. It was, whatchamacallits before that, Schutt's, right? Yeah, that was a girl's store, so of course you didn't go into a girl's store. You wouldn't want to be even caught dead having your mother drag you into a girl's store, let alone go in there on your own. So Schutt's was definitely a taboo for me. And likewise, Pat T's would have been for my sisters, I'm sure, because that time was a men's clothing store. Other taboos, I can't think of. Well, the girls didn't go into the barber shop. That was off limits to any of the female persuasion too, because one, it may have been illegal at that time. I think for men, or for a barber to cut women's hair. I know there have been some laws like that and vice versa, because that's another thing, men didn't go into the beauty shop. That was quite the deal. Probably, this might have been way after high school actually, but men started going to the beauty shop to have their hair done. That was a little questionable.
You did not do just a code of behavior that was acceptable, not acceptable?
Yeah, but it probably came from my parents more than from the store. But you know, I think everybody's parents taught them the same thing. You didn't go roaming up and down the aisles, but you didn't even think about it. You just knew not to do that. You go to the dime store, you'd corner yourself there by the comic books and enjoy yourself. And if you had a little money with you, you could go over to penny candy or else the bulk candy around the counters and buy a little of that. But you didn't stray any further than that from the store. You didn't go roaming around there harassing the customers or anything like that, or even just being in the way. And I don't know how we knew that. We just didn't even think of doing something otherwise, I guess.
And going through high school, did the language taboos change at all?
Oh yeah,
would you say?
sure,
How
yeah.
did that-
You could swear all you wanted to.
But in certain company or not?
Well, if you were at the bowling alley, you could say whatever you wanted to, but not loudly. You were still cautious about who it might offend. Well, you weren't cautious about who it might offend. You were cautious about who might hear you saying something didn't like and go tell your parents what you were doing. That's probably what it came from. But yeah, you spoke like the grown men when you were in high school.
What about the pool hall? Did you feel that the men were careful about what they said around you?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely they were. And I specifically remember Smoke Vasica one time starting to tell some story. Never got to hear it, of course, because he's going, I just slide around here away from the boy. So it must have been a good one, but I know I never got to hear that. Yeah, the men were careful around me when I was a kid.
Do you think that's changed now, or just that or not?
Yeah, I think if a kid went into the, well, I see this still in the Palmer House. Kids will go into the Palmer House because that's a restaurant and whatever, and perfectly acceptable for young people to go in there. And no, they don't, well, some of them will, but there are people like my generation that aren't careful at all around what they say around the kids. Because I've had my nephews in there, I've noticed that too. Of course, these nephews have heard the same thing in their grade schools now too, so whole society has changed. It's probably a factor that people are much more mobile now. They have all kinds of things to do on Sunday morning besides go to church. We don't have that. That isn't nearly the strong influence, I don't think, that it used to be when we were growing up. And I would attribute it to that anyway. It's, things are a lot more free and open simply because they don't have that one controlling factor there as to how you should behave and what you should do.
And you think the mobility is responsible?
Yeah, because actually we had no other option but to go to church on Sunday mornings. It wasn't a big inconvenience. I talked to my sister now, her kid's in confirmation. He can only miss 3 services the rest of the year. Got to take sermon notes. And this is a big imposition on her because they have a lot of things to do. They have a cabin up at Lost Island. Now they have to find a church near Ruthven or somewhere so they can, get the kids to follow the rules here. And when we were growing up, you wouldn't think of driving that far just to go to a lake or even to have a cabin. That was really extravagant. And these are just your basic middle-class people having this kind of stuff now. I think main streets of small towns like Pocahontas are significant because this is a part of the entire community. It's not the main part, it's not the most important part, but it's a part, and it is important because it defines the community for one thing. Okay, you asked where I'm from. I am from Pocahontas. Even though I'm physically closer to Palmer, partly because I went to school in Pocahontas, but yet because this is the main shopping town, I am from Pocahontas. So it defines your community. It also shows what's going on in the rest of the community. It's an integral part of it all here because since we people who live out here in the country need to buy things or need to interact with this, that, or whatever, we go to town to do it. The significance is changing. I think some of these people uptown are missing this. Living in a city as I do, part-time, and seeing what's going on back here. Like, for example, I use the grocery stores here as only a convenience store. And I think they're kind of aware that this is happening, but they're missing the boat a little bit because you can see what's happening in these small towns. Main streets being replaced by the Casey's out on the highway, right? You see this in every little town. Pomeroy, if you want to buy something in Pomeroy, you go to Casey's because Main Street is just not there. And I think the stores were asleep when this happened. I used to read things about this when it happened. They were like fighting this. They didn't think this was a good idea. Well, the consumer obviously thought it was a good idea because they're going to Casey's to buy stuff. So the stores, like one thing that bothers me here is I can't buy food whenever I feel like it. I don't think we need to have stores open 24 hours, but it's a real inconvenience to me because of my hours. I work late morning to early evening. When I'm done working, the grocery stores are closed. I'm used to in the city, I go down the street, get what I want for supper and make it. And I think the stores are missing a little bit of business there. It probably wouldn't happen right away that the people would change their habits because they've had to make their habits fit with what the stores are doing. But if the towns would realize that what they're really providing here is a convenience outlet for the people around here and cater towards those needs more than what they're trying to do now, they wouldn't have near the problems they think that they have here. We pay anywhere from 25 to 33 cents a loaf for tissue bread, 45 cents for wheat. No, milk, $1.69 a gallon. Now you go to Hy-Vee over here and you can save a little money, but no, you go to Woods and the prices there are just like convenience store prices, and they have to be because the way they're hauling stuff in and whatever. But no, it's expensive to buy food back here. Cars cost the same, housing's really cheap, and food's outrageous. Now to go to food in a restaurant, that's another story. You can go up to Lorenz and I think it's $2.25 for a roast beef dinner.
Then it's really expensive.
Yeah, I don't know how they buy the parts for that, but no, you can. But grocery stores, I'm trying to think. I don't buy a lot of stuff here. I can't compare, but I see. Well, there's pluses and minuses. Hardware stores, they seem to do well in Pocahontas. You've got both True Value and Coast to Coast. And that makes it a real town, I think, because it's got a coast-to-coast and a true value. That's another interesting thing. There's no competition left on Main Street. I don't remember who was Leo Patty's competition, but there surely was something. You could buy clothes. Anthony's, that's right. You have a real town when you have two people competing. When you only have one business offering all the products that you need, there's no competition. I mean, I'm sure Howard Patty's not going to intentionally rip you off, but it would be nice if maybe there was an Anthony's down the street so that there'd be a little competition and it would generate some interest and whatever. And I'm sure Howard would appreciate an Anthony's down the street too. He's even told me this. We've talked about what's going on with Main Street, and you know, I says, it looks good here because the buildings are full. And he says, well, it's not as good as it looks because, he says, an insurance peddler comes in, or you know, this, that, or whatever, an accountant. He says, they're fine people, but it doesn't bring retail Main Street back. We're losing retail Main Street here. And I don't know the answer. If I did, I'd maybe go start a store up there. But I think they're, you know, if they're going to try and compete with the Walmart, it's silly because it's only half an hour over to Storm Lake and you've got Wally World, everything you needed. But I have found, for example, building a treehouse out here. You want to buy some 16-penny nails, don't buy them at Wally World, you go up to coast because you can buy them bulk there, 63 cents a pound. It's a bargain to go buy nails in Pocahontas. And so instead of competing with Wally World, they should kind of, you know, point out what they've got that does compete with Wally World because it's better, it's cheaper, it's closer. Rather than trying to coerce people to go shopping up there, just show them what they have that's a better deal. People will buy it, they're not stupid. Well, it's obviously already changed Main Street because you got Leo Hallman with a computer store up there. It's going to change it a lot. These people back here are, for lack of a better term, backwards. Okay, I have a fax machine right here in this room. The bank uses the lawyer down the street for a fax machine. This is technology I have to have. I've had one for years. Okay, you'll find maybe, a handful of fax machines yet in Pocahontas. A fax machine is a computer. It's a little different version. It's just a chip that converts bytes to dots and whatever. But yeah, you'll see a lot of difference in what Main Street's doing with computers because it's a part of our life, and I think you could see a lot more difference. This is another thing about significance of Main Street, and I think where they're missing the boat here, is we're on the edge right now of a big change in technology. I mean, 10 years ago, you couldn't even buy a personal computer. 8 or 9 years ago, you could buy one at about $4,000. That one that used to cost $4,000 costs about $600 now, and it's an antique. So things have really changed. And they tell us we're in the information age. And I think there's a big opportunity for Main Street to take advantage of this. If they would look where we are, we're in the information age, and what they're providing, they should address this. There's a demand out there. I mean, I make my living providing information. That's all I do. I'm a leech on society. I don't grow corn, I don't grow anything you can eat. I grow something you don't even need, but something you want, and that's information. If the small towns around here were to recognize that, get a little more familiar with computers, a little more friendly with them, you know, set things up. Like you had a big change here when you got the new phone system at Pocahontas, because now you're technically able to deal with this. Prior to that, at least from talking to George Tuttle, you didn't even dare use a modem on your phone system because you'd lose your transmission with that mechanical system. But now with the progress you've made here, you've got something you can work with. And I think you could attract a lot of people back here. I love living back here. It's such a nice, quiet lifestyle that, you know, it's just wonderful compared to living in the city. But there's people like me out there. A lot of them don't want to move to Pocahontas, Iowa because they don't have the ties that I have here. But they want to go to places like this. They've had it with the cities. And I think if the towns would recognize this, they could seize an opportunity here to make it attractive to these people to come back here. I mean, like Pocahontas, and you talk about Main Street, the significance of the theater. You have people here building a legitimate theater in a town of 2,000 people. This is wonderful. If you know, I like to, being a marketing major, I like to look at what happened. Okay, Metro Denver is about 1,000 times bigger than Pocahontas. So that same scale, one legitimate theater in Pocahontas is like having 1,000 of them in Metro Denver. Can you imagine? I mean, it wouldn't happen, right? So what they're doing is really neat up here. And these are the kind of things that will attract people to this city. So that's a real plus on Main Street. There's some people here that are, they're probably not sitting down and analyzing, you know, how do we go about attracting people and whatever, but there's some people doing some things here I'm really impressed with, and that's one of them, is, you know, the theater, making it a legitimate theater on Main Street, because that's going to attract people. It makes it worth living here, makes it worth coming here. And maybe they're going to have to change their tune a little bit to, you know, more people are going to have to start doing things like this. Look what the people need, what they could attract here, because it's obvious we need people around here. Because if you don't have people, nobody's going to go up to Howard Patty's and, you know, buy overalls or suits or whatever. You got to have the customer base.
What else already has been done that has impressed you?
On Main Street of Pocahontas, let's see. Leo Hallman impresses me. I know a lot about computers, I also know what he's dealing with. I go into his store every so often, and I hear the phone ring, and I hear things he's talking about, and we'll discuss. That guy puts out a tremendous amount of effort for nothing, answering, they're essentially stupid questions, but they're not stupid to the person who's asking them because they have a real need to know this kind of stuff. So Leo's a real pioneer, and I'm impressed with that. Let's see, let's go up the street. Who's doing some other things? Annie Herman did a neat thing. This has been a few years ago, but a woman barber, that was pretty much off the wall at the time. There's someone who took a chance, and it seems to be doing okay with it here. That little park up on Main Street, that's nice. You go to the, what do they call it, with the mural and stuff? That's nice, because you go to a lot of main streets and they got a trashed out building or an empty building. Pretty soon the eyes are knocked out and it just looks terrible. Here they took and did something with it. They made a little friendly park to attract people uptown, make it a comfortable place to be. The theater is the next thing up that would catch my mind. The garden club around here does a lot of neat stuff. Again, you take the marketplace here and in Denver. If people in Denver put the same effort into putting flowers around everywhere, can you imagine the flowers you'd have in a big city? It just couldn't be done. That's neat. I'm impressed by that, because anywhere you go around town, you're within a few blocks of what the garden clubs put up for, just for the fun of it, something they enjoy doing. It really adds a lot to the town. Going back down the other side, a lot of people trying hard on that side of the street, I'll give them that. Seems to be a lot of turnover in those buildings, but everybody's always got an idea they're going to try to do something there. Take a side street down to the library. I'm really impressed with the library. That's another thing, if you take, scale it up to the big city and what you're doing here with what you've got, it's incredible. You can get anything you need at your library. You might have to order out for it or whatever, but the hours are good. I mean, I'm used to a library I can go to 10 o'clock at night or something like that, but I can't expect that in Pocahontas, Iowa. I get more than I expect out of the library in Pocahontas. That's a good thing you have there. We're on the other end of Main Street. I'm out of